All right, well, it is time to talk about postmodernism in architecture, which means, because this is an AP course, it's time to talk about this. I don't like this one at all. It ain't very good. So, I don't think this is a very good example of postmodernism at all. Um, but that doesn't make much sense if you don't know what postmodernism is. So, very quickly, let's talk about what postmodernism is. Postmodernism is a movement that is a reaction to modernism. So, for those keeping track at home, you've had classical and neoclassical architecture, and then the reaction to that and the nationalism it implies with modernism, and then the reaction to modernism, which is, of course, postmodernism. And interestingly, one of the great architects of postmodernism, bug, is Philip Johnson, who also helped design a great work of modernism, which is also required work, the Seagram's building. Um, so what is postmodernism? Postmodernism is a reaction to modernism, which is something I've already said. But why is it a reaction to modernism? There's two reasons, I think, or not I think. There's two reasons that you can go with as to why postmodernism is a thing and why it comes out of modernism. The first thing that you can say very simply is that a lot of these academic modernists that become postmodernists feel as though that modernism has become just as closed off and elitist and academic and conservative as the neoclassical that it sought to replace. So they feel like it's time for some change. So they need to attack the old or challenge the old method, which is now, at this point in the 70s, 80s, postmodernism. Um, the other reason is that a lot of people feel as though aesthetically modernism went too far. They threw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Um, and they said, modernism's good and this focus on geometry is good, but there's something deeply human about classical architecture, and not just European classical architecture, but uh, Asian classical architecture, both uh, East Asian and West Asian. African architecture. And of course, included in that is Egyptian architecture, which is part of Africa, but is a little bit more classical. Um, the designs of Latin America, uh, Mayan architecture, Aztec architecture, so on and so forth, that there's something deeply human about these aesthetics. So, in seeking to get away from nationalism, the modernists completely threw out any idea of appreciating the aesthetics of the classical architecture. And they want to get back to that. They want to blend, simply put, modernism with classical architecture, kind of slam them together. Some examples of this are a lot better than others. Unfortunately, the required example, House in Newcastle County by Robert Venturi, is not a great example, at least for learning. Um, so let's talk about a great example of postmodern architecture. There's many out there. Um, there's all different kinds of postmodernism. There's very playful postmodernism with like kind of uh, pop art examples. There's also very just up and down, clean cut examples. And then there's very abstract examples. House in Newcastle County being a very abstract example. Let's talk about a really concrete example. Philip Johnson's AT&T building. This is a great example of postmodernism. It's a skyscraper. It's made out of a modern material. It's very up and down, but at the same time, it is very specifically designed to appear as a Greek column with a broken pediment or an oculus at the top. And when you look at it, you see these things. It's got those long fluted lines. It's got the broken pediment at the top. It has that oculus. Um, that's a great example of postmodern architecture. There's many others that I can't think of right off the top of my head because I didn't write them down, so I'm not going to say them. But unfortunately, the learning example here is House in Newcastle County. And it is very postmodern. It's just not a great example because you don't quite get the context of what postmodernism is. Once again, postmodernism is challenging the classical challenging the now conservative modernist movement, and doing that by reviving older styles and appreciating the aesthetics of world architecture instead of just going with very strict modernism. Once again, immediately, AT&T building springs to mind. But Robert Venturi, your required architect, Mies van der Rohe says, less is more, and he's a modernist. Robert Venturi says, less is a bore. He likes his stuff to be over the top. He's very abstract. There's a lot of examples of postmodernism from him that are really great, like the house he built for his mother. I don't know why the AP board didn't choose that one, but they didn't. So let's talk about House in Newcastle County to wrap this up. When you look at House in Newcastle County, I guess the thing that makes it so abstract is it's very all over the place. You look at the interior. You've got what almost appears as a Gothic roof with these exposed wooden beams. You've got that weird ceiling fan that, I don't know, almost looks modernist. You look at the outside. It's a New England barn. However, you also have that facade that is clearly aesthetic, that is 2D examples of, Greek columns. It's just all over the place. It's got all these different examples of different world architecture. I think the one thing missing from this postmodern piece, quite frankly, is the modernism. Everything else is there. But that's postmodernism in a real nutshell there. There's certainly many great examples. Look at other Robert Venturi works. I mean, the man did the Las Vegas Strip, the Luxor Casino, and those things. Those are great examples of postmodernism. However, the one you are stuck with, if it comes up on the AP test, is House in Newcastle County. So when you look at House in Newcastle County, you think about, what can I say about this? Remember, postmodernism is a reaction to the strict, drab, conservative aesthetics of modernism, specifically in the 1960s. It is trying to challenge modernism by bringing back and mixing together older styles of architecture with modernism to say, hey, modernism's great and rejecting nationalism is good. However, there's something deeply archetypal about the column, about the bas relief carving, about the pediment, about step pyramids, about the geometrics of Mayan architecture, about the hypostyle hall, so on and so forth. And we shouldn't lose those things just because we are trying to lose conservative nationalism in art. Oh, guys, I really wish there was a better example of postmodernism for me to talk about, but it's House in Newcastle County. I hope this clears up what postmodernism is and how you can use it contextually to talk about this mess that is House in Newcastle County. I really think the AP board, when they chose the example of postmodernism, kind of purposely chose this because whoever picked it hates postmodern architecture and really wanted to make a whole generation of students hate it. But if you want a great example, once again, just look at Robert Venturi's other work, especially The House for His Mother. Much better example. Fade to black. I need a better sign off. I'm sorry. Maybe